Hey friends, it's Hank from Sprues and Brews, and welcome to a very special St. Patrick's Day episode of Behind the Build, a series where we'll chat about my experience building up some of my favorite scale model kits, as well as a bit of the history behind the real-life vehicles that inspired these projects. As today's St. Patty's Day, I figured it was only right to break out my lovely little Irish Guards Sherman Firefly here. It's one of my favorite kits of all time, and I'm really excited to chat with you guys about it. So, you guys know the drill by now. Grab yourself a beverage, get cozy. Let's check it out. So here we are. If you've been following my work on Instagram for a while, you've definitely seen this kit pop up before. But if you're new here, welcome aboard. Very glad to have you. I started building this Sherman way back in 2019 using Asuka's phenomenal Sherman Firefly IC kit. It's kit number 35028 for reference, and I'll have a link for it in the description below if you want to check it out later. And for those of you who might not be familiar with Asuka Models, it's a great company out of Japan that makes, in my opinion, probably the best Shermans on the market right now. At least when it comes to the level of detail and quality, these things are fantastic. I picked up this kit because I really wanted to get a Firefly in my collection. They're such iconic tanks, and it was about time to give one a go. Unfortunately, there's not a ton of them on the market right now, despite being such a popular and famous vehicle. I think Asuka and Ryefield are probably the only ones that have readily accessible ones on the market. There was a Tamiya Reeboks back in 2014, but I haven't seen one of those around in a while. But anyway, I've had a lot of good experiences with Asuka, and this build was certainly not an exception. Before we get into the details of the build itself, I suppose a little background information on the Sherman Firefly is probably a good idea. So I mentioned that this is a Sherman Firefly IC. There are two main versions of the Firefly, the IC and the VC, but the common factor between the two is the massive 17-pounder main gun. As World War II progressed and the Allies found themselves coming up against bigger and stronger German tanks like the Tiger and the Panther, it became evident pretty quickly that the 75mm all-purpose gun wasn't up to snuff against those tougher opponents. But it was a pretty difficult proposition to get anything larger than that in the existing Sherman turret. The tank was designed around the 75 and to some extent the 105mm howitzer, and the turret interior was already pretty cozy as it was. So the Americans ended up fiddling around and mounting the slightly bigger turret from their T-23 project on the Sherman. They slapped a 76mm gun on there, which was a definitive improvement. But the British and Commonwealth forces had another idea. They took it a whole step further. They had an existing anti-tank gun, the Ordnance quick-firing 17-pounder, that had already shown signs of success against these bigger German tanks in Africa and Italy. So instead of making a new turret altogether, they took some of the Lend-Lease Shermans that they already had, and they hoofed this 17-pounder in there anyway. Some modifications had to be made to the gun, including rotating it 90 degrees to fit into the existing turret, and they had to cut a hole in the back of the bustle on the back of the turret to extend the radio compartment to account for the actual recoil. But it basically worked, and it created this beautiful Frankenstein's monster tank that packed a serious punch. And as a bonus, it was ready in time for the D-Day landings. The 76mm Shermans wouldn't be adopted by the American armor divisions until Operation Cobra a couple months later. Now, as I mentioned, the two variants of the Firefly were the VC and the IC. The British used their own naming system for Lend-Lease Shermans using Roman numerals. So in the US, for example, we'd call the standard M4 the M4. The Brits would call it the Sherman 1, or the Sherman I. The M4A1 was the Sherman 2, the M4A2 was the Sherman 3, etc., etc. You play it forward. So the British Fireflies were made on two different hulls, the Sherman V, or 5, which was the M4A4, and the Sherman 1 hybrid, or the composite hull M4. The Sherman 5 used a massive Chrysler A57 multi-bank engine, and the tank itself was about a foot longer than all the other versions of the Sherman to accommodate for this massive 30 cylinders firing away. And the Sherman 1 used the Continental R975 radial that the tank was originally built around. The Sherman 1 composite was an interesting production model of the tank that was essentially the cast front of an M4A1 fused to the rear hull of a standard M4, mechanically identical, but still kind of interesting. Now the C that you see in the name is indicative of the armament, not the fact that the tank was a composite tank. The letters slapped on the end of the British names refer to the gun itself. So anything that has a C has the 17-pounder. Anything with a B has the 105mm howitzer, and anything with an A has the 76mm. All in all, Commonwealth forces made about 2,200 Fireflies between the two variants, and they did pretty damn well up against the Panzer divisions. So, there you go. Now, back to the kit itself. I decided to build this Firefly up as one belonging to the Irish Guards of the Guards Armor Division because I wanted to do a little Normandy breakout or Operation Market Garden M4. Also, just a quick aside because it is St. Patrick's Day, to be clear, the Republic of Ireland was officially neutral during World War II. Irish Guards are technically an organization within the British Army, not the Irish Defence Forces. Prince William is the Colonel-in-Chief of the Irish Guards, so do with that what you will. But the force takes its motto from the Order of St. Patrick. They've got the clover on the capstar, etc., etc. And folks from the Republic do often serve in the Guard, including many of the Irishmen that fought during World War II. The organization mainly recruits men from Northern Ireland and from the Republic itself, but you don't necessarily have to be Irish. But anyway, let's get the kit under the top-down camera so you can take a better look at it. Alright, so here is our kit up nice and close. We'll start out with the decals here. You can see we've got the Guards Armor Division insignia right there, which is part of what helped me decide to do this particular livery. It looks pretty cool. I also wanted to make a Firefly that was pretty much completely covered in crap, which you can see this one is. If you look at reference photos of British and Commonwealth Shermans, and just British and Commonwealth tanks in general, they're usually always covered in camouflage and applique armor and all sorts of good stuff like that. Commonwealth forces did a great job camouflaging their tanks. So they're always covered in nets and tarps and Hessian tape, like you see here, all sorts of goodies. So that's what I tried to replicate in this particular model. Now, I won't get into too much depth on this because I have a whole two-part video on how to replicate these kind of effects. I'll link that right here so you can check it out if you'd like. But basically, we've got some tissue paper tarps, like you see on the gun mantlet here, a little bit of 1/35 scale netting around the turret and on the barrel, and then some Hessian tape on the barrel. And this is basically just made of Tamiya masking tape. It's replicating like a burlap strap kind of camouflage that was used by Commonwealth forces, and I think it came out pretty good. Like I mentioned, these are just Tamiya masking tape strips cut down to length. They're literally held onto the barrel with tape and then the paint layer later, and then I hand brushed paint in these various kind of neutral tones afterwards. And I love how this came out. I like doing this on tanks, and I think it looks pretty cool. There are a lot less Fireflies out there than your bog standard M4 75mm Shermans. So the crews did a good job of trying to kind of hide these, telltale barrels as best they could with Hessian tape and other camouflage patterns. So I think it's a fun thing to try and do on Fireflies if you make one up. And like I said, I'm really happy with how this came out here. One of the other great things about this kit is all the stuff that it came with. Probably more than any kit I've seen. Asuka put a ton of extra little goodies in here. You got a million little bits and bobs that you could throw on the tank, make up separately and throw on the tank in no particular order. We've got ammo cases in the back here, these big long green ones, for the 17-pounder rounds. We've got some ammo crates for the 30mm coax. We've got oil tins, we've got rations, we've got a bucket, we've got a teapot here, we've even got a little teapot. Ton of applique armor made of spare tracks on the front there, some jerry cans. We've even got a 6-pounder crate here, which is funny that they included that because obviously this tank doesn't have a 6-pounder, so that would literally be on there just for stowing stuff. But great little inclusions from Asuka. Super happy that they threw that all in. And then to round that all off, I've got some resin components on here from Value Gear. Always love some Value Gear stowage. Really spruces up your builds quite a bit, so I like to use that as well. I did a pretty basic olive drab paint job on this kit. Most of the weathering is a combination of pin washes and some pigment work around the tracks and the suspension system there. I didn't do a ton of oil filter stuff because most of the the vertical sides of the tank are covered in junk here. So you can't really see oil streaking that well. So I kind of went light on that and just went a little heavier on the dust and mud and just, pretty obvious pin wash stuff as well using using Ammo's Dark Wash. And to round it all off, I picked up a fantastic little Alpine Miniatures Commonwealth Tank Commander here to put up in the turret. He looks great up there. This is my first Commonwealth figure painting job that I did, and I'm happy with how he came out. All in all, I absolutely love this build. It's a Firefly, so it gets a big head start right off the bat. And I was super impressed by all the extras that Asuka included in this kit. The level of detail is fantastic, and it's a gem of a build, honestly. And if you get the chance, I highly, highly recommend picking one of these up. They always go pretty quickly whenever they get restocked on Sprue Brothers, so make sure you hop on there now or whenever you get a chance and sign up for the notify when available emails to be sure you get a heads up whenever Asuka replenishments come through. Again, not sponsored by Sprue Brothers or anything, but it's tough to get your hands on one of these, so make sure you do the homework ahead of time. So, have a wonderful St. Paddy's Day, my friends. Please drink responsibly if you're out celebrating, and have a great time out there. And if you want to check out my tutorial on nets, tarps, and Hessian tape, you can do so right here. So, until next time, guys, be well, happy building, plancha.